So at this very moment, in Ridgecrest, North Carolina, Uncle Ben is dropping Noah and Braden off at Camp Ridgecrest. So right now, that's happening. So pray for Murray and I. Don't worry about Noah; he'll be fine. But our baby is going to camp. And I know for Murray, it's emotional. Only Murray, not me. I'm fine. And it's the camp I went to, and we're going to go next. We're going to pick him up, so I get to look at the camp that I have such great memories of that I went to when I was a kid. And there's a lot of summer camps, and this one's the best of them all. Okay, just forget about it. It's number one. And it is a great place. The same director, good old Ron, is that when I was there is still there. Doesn't have any hair, but he's still there. And then looking at the website, I thought when we were thinking about doing this, I thought they're not going to do the same crazy stuff that we used to do. You know, the moms have probably taken over and sliced and diced all the stuff. Nope, it's the exact same. In fact, he sends emails and said, don't even try to stick a cell phone in their bag. Don't even do it. They're not going to call home. We're going to take that. We're going to charge you $200 if there's a cell phone in there, you know. So they don't mess around. Yeah. And because it's a rite of passage. That's what it's to drop off a boy and pick up a man is what it's for. And we need that desperately in this society, don't we? There's no back fence to the camp. The back, if you just start taking trails, and next thing you know, you're in a national forest in the mountains in the Appalachians. I mean, that's the way this place is. And so I remember for me, you know, and probably during the time, I just thought I was having fun, and I didn't recognize the change. But for me, it was a rite of passage, and that's what they're after. What they're after is to make spiritual leaders out of these boys, turn them into men, and make them spiritual leaders. And there's a Crest Ridge for girls too, with the same goal. And you know, that's a call for all of us, isn't it? It's not just for boys that go to Ridgecrest. That's a call for all believers. We all need that, don't we? We all need Ron to call us into being grown up and being leaders in our family, spiritual leaders in our family, in our workplace, in our community, in our neighborhood. Wherever we are to be that. We are to be spiritual leaders. So it's a call for all of us. In the Gospel of Mark today and in Genesis, we have 3 keys on how to do that. And that's really what Jesus is doing in the Gospel of Mark. He has sent the disciples out by themselves, in twos, without Jesus, right? So that is, when you do that, you're calling them to a higher level. I mean, I worked briefly in a lot of different things, didn't I? As you guys know my story, I've had lots of different jobs, but I was in human resources at one point and as a consultant and a trainer. And the way to get someone to be able to do your job is to leave and let them do your job. There's just no other way to do it. You've got to go away and let them do it for a period of time. And that's what Jesus did. Go out in twos and go. You have authority to heal and to cast out demons. Go ahead. Go do it. And they did. So clearly he's trying to train them. He knows he's got a limited amount of time. He knows that he needs leaders after he's gone. And so that's what he's training them to do. And he's also now showing them, he's taking a step up himself and showing them that he can do things beyond just healing and casting out demons, as big as those things are, he's now stepping it up a notch and doing more. And so he's training them is what he's doing. He's showing them more. And so he's, this is the scripture. It's the same call to us to be spiritual leaders. And so there's 3 keys here. And the first is 3 keys to being spiritual leaders. Number 1 is to trust in God's provision. Trust in God's provision. And in the Joseph story, which now focuses more on Jacob in this final act, this is Act 3 of the story, and Jacob comes into focus. We talked about last week, he was in spiritual famine, Jacob was. He never accepted the loss of Joseph. He wasn't God wasn't showing him which of his sons was going to be the next patriarch. Because since Abraham, then Isaac, then him, there was other brothers, but there was one that was chosen to be the next patriarch, and that wasn't clear. He was fearfully blanketing Benjamin and trying to protect him in case he was the one, and not letting Benjamin do anything or go anywhere with his brothers, remember? And then one key thing, he stopped moving. The patriarchs were nomads. That land was promised to them. They were eventually going to settle there, but they were to just keep moving around. That's what Abraham and Isaac did. And during this whole time, while Joseph's in Egypt, over 20 years, at least 20 years, we don't have any evidence of Jacob going anywhere. Jacob didn't leave. He just stayed right there, maybe in hope that Joseph would one day come home. But he didn't go anywhere. And that was important. Because when you went somewhere, God showed up. That might be a truth right there. Sometimes we got to be on the move spiritually for God to show up. And so he hadn't moved. There's no accounts of him having some vision or God showing up in a dream during this whole time. Jacob, it's just famine. It's quiet. There's no visions, no dreams, no appearances of angels. He's not building any altars. He's not planting any trees. He's not doing any of these things that the patriarchs did before him. So he was really in this famine. And then a physical famine happens as well. But now, with the news that Joseph is alive, his spirit is revived, as we talked about, and now he's ready to make a move, finally. This is verse 1 in chapter 46. So Israel set out with all that was his, and when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And so there's a lot there, but Glenn noticed one thing. Good job, Glenn. You're qualified to be up here. You did your homework, and he saw that, wait, isn't this guy's name Jacob? You see, the narrator decides to call him Israel here. Now Israel is on the move. And you know the story, right, of when Jacob wrestled with God that night, when he was praying to God, and he had a great anxiety on his mind as he was going to meet his brother Esau, who just happened to have an army of men with him. And last time he saw Esau, he was stealing his birthright and blessing from him. So he had some things on his mind. So this happens to us, doesn't it? We wake up at 3 a.m. and we wrestle with God a bit. So it was one of those nights for him, and he wrestled with an angel and held on and would not let go until that angel blessed him. And so, therefore, his name was changed to Israel, which means one who strives with God, who wrestles with God. And it's in a victorious sense. In that he didn't necessarily overcome God, but he was victorious in winning a blessing. And that was because he just held on through that struggle. And it's a perfect contrast to his given name, Jacob, which means supplanter or deceiver, which is exactly what he was. He was holding on to his twin brother's heel, remember, as he came out, wanting to be that first one out. And then he did deceive his brother to receive that blessing. So that's really his human name is Jacob. His God-given, this new name, And sometimes we see that with the patriarchs. You get a new name when you step into that leadership role. And so he had that new name, Israel, and he wasn't living into it during the famine. But now, as he goes, as he trusts God, he receives this new name. It's like they don't do this at Ridgecrest, but you do. You're put into a tribe, and you become an Indian, and you do these ceremonies where you can't even say a word. If you talk, they'll pull you out, and they're very serious about it. And so you do get, if you reach a certain level, you do actually get an Indian name, and so you're renamed in a sense. And so now he had been renamed, but now he went through a famine, and now he's finally living into that. And so the narrator calls him Israel. And then there's Beersheba, which Glenn also noticed. It's upstate. It's upstate New York, huh? And notice that he doesn't just go to Egypt. He stops in Beersheba. And there's a lot of significance to that, because Abraham, when he was traveling around, moving, he stopped there and he planted a tree and invoked the name of Yahweh. He prayed to Yahweh, sacrificed to Yahweh. Isaac built an altar there. So we have Abraham has been there, planted a tree, invoked the name of Yahweh. Isaac built an altar there, invoked the name of Yahweh, and that night God appeared to Isaac and said, the covenant is going to be passed on to you. The promises I made to your father, I'm making to you. You will become a great nation. You will have a land, and from you will come a worldwide blessing. So those promises, the covenant was then passed on there. And now Jacob is there with his entire clan, the whole group. Give them credit for going as well. The whole group went. And it says he's offering sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. So there he is, maybe on that same altar. And so he is really stepping in to that leadership role in front of his family, taking his family with him, being the leader of that family, and saying, here's what we do. Here's what we do. You know, these days, it's kind of vogue, I guess, to say to our children, you know, you make your own decision on what religion you are, or whatever it is. And that's actually, for a while, that's taken place, and some people have grown up with that. And you know what they've said is, most of them, I wish my parents just would have shown me, here's what we do. Here's how we live. This is what our thing is. This is what we believe. This is what we do. Now, you know, once you're out of the house and you grow up, sure, you can make your own decision, but we're going to show you what we do. Instead, what happens a lot of the time is the parents take the easy way out and say, we're not going to do anything because we're going to let them make their own choice. You know what they're going to choose? Cartoons, video games. You know, they're going to worship the god of whatever, spinning tops that fight each other and stuff, Japanese cartoons. Who knows where they're going to go if you let them. You got to say, here's what we are. This is what we do. And raise them up in that. That's what we are to do, to be spiritual leaders in our family. So now Jacob is not living in famine and fear, and he's saying, listen, this is the place where your great-grandfather Abraham, he talked to Yahweh. This is where my father, your grandfather, Isaac, received the covenant. This is the place. And so bringing them in. And then Beersheba is a place of provision, because it's very south. It's actually mentioned as the southernmost part of the promised land. So it's in the Negev, down in the desert. And there's wells there, fortunately, to provide water. Here's a little Hebrew for you. Beer means well. How about that, huh? Beer means well. You won't forget that, will you? It's not where we got the name beer. It just happens to be a coincidence. Beer comes from a Latin word. So Beer means well, and Sheba means oath. And some oaths had been taken at that well. In fact, Abraham and Isaac both made peace treaties, oaths, with Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, there, so that they could live in peace as they roamed among this foreign place. Now, going back, Hagar and Ishmael, remember when they were kicked out by Sarah, they went into the desert, they ran out of water, and she put him remember, she left him and left him to die in the desert and went away and prayed to God, crying and saying, now we're out of water and we're in the desert and we're going to die. And God showed up and said, here, let me show you. Here is a well. That place, Beersheba. Abraham settled there by a well. Isaac had his servants dig a well there. So this is God's provision in the middle of the desert. So Jacob is seeking this reconnection with God. He's being the family leader, and he's showing them, because what's the first thing on our mind when, usually all the time, we're already maybe thinking about lunch. What's provision? Where's my provision? You know, when we set out on a spiritual journey, that's top of the list, right? Do we have enough along the way? You know, the commentary I read about it in Mark was saying, 5 loaves and 2 fish, that's not even enough for the 12 in Jesus. They were already underprovided right there, So how could they get in a boat with that little and go on a journey? And so it is what we worry about, and we need to be spiritual leaders in our community, in our family, in our workplace, neighborhood. We need to trust in God's provision. This church, OCC, was founded in August of 82. Yeah, August 1982. So it's the very end of July. So in a few days here, we'll be in August 2017. Do the math. I already did it. 35 years. Okay? 35 years is what we're coming, is the landmark we're coming across. Now, has God not provided for this church for 35 years? How many people has this church helped through the sharing fund for 35 years? How many missions trips have been taken over the 35 years? How many missions people have been supported over the 35 years? How many, getting personal, how many people salaries have been paid over the 35 years here? Murray and I will always be grateful to God for the provision that OCC's provided for us. I mean, seminary, those days in seminary, I followed God's call without thinking about provision. I was already sitting in my first class, and they had like a spread of bagels set out, and I was like, well, I'd say to the guy next to me, kind of nice. They got breakfast for us, and he said, yeah, well, for $1,000 a class, they ought to have breakfast. And I was like, $1,000 a class? What am I doing here? And so I didn't have any clue. I was already in. Didn't even know how much it cost. And so Murray and I were both, and I was full-time in seminary, and we had little kids, and we were juggling, and Murray worked 2 or 3 days a week in sales. I think I worked back to my many jobs. I worked in a chocolate factory at that point. That was awesome. And so anyway, and so I'd get these bills. I was taking all these classes, so at the beginning of the semester, I'd get this bill, and I just turn it into the church, and then whatever was left would come back due to us. And then Murray would make some sale, and it would just get wiped off the board. It's just like, God, and this happened for 3 years. It just kept happening. And then I just graduated, and we couldn't believe it. For 35 years, has God not provided for you up until this very moment? And so, yet we always go back to it, and the devil trips us up right there with this idea that, no, you can't go because you don't have the provisions. Trust God. He is your provider. So now in the Gospel of Mark, in Israel in Jesus' day, there were also absolutely in spiritual famine as well. And it was a reflection of the leadership of the country. Just like Jacob was in spiritual famine, therefore the people of God. The leadership of Israel in Jesus' day, when Jesus came into Israel, here it is that much later, it's a full nation, and Jesus comes in, and the leadership was weak. I mean, not only the religious leadership, we know that, the Pharisees, here comes the Messiah, and they want to kill him. Obviously, they were very poor, and Jesus was confronting them. But the story, Mark, when we look at how Mark arranges things, and it's unique. It's not. It's a unique gospel in itself, and we've been enjoying that. Is right before this, he puts this story about Herod, about one of Herod's sons, who's now the tetrarch ruler of the area of Galilee, and it's just dripping with dysfunction and evil. He is the leader of this area. So it's no wonder that that place is an absolute spiritual famine. It's no wonder, because the leadership was so poor. The leadership was just evil. I mean, flat out evil. It's the worst story in the New Testament. It's just lust and murder, and it's just horrible. And so Mark places that right before that Jesus sends out the disciples. Then Mark tells that story, the disciples return. And then what happens? This is what happens, Mark 6:34. When Jesus went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. See? And that's what Jesus is seeing. He has compassion on these people because they're leaderless. They have no spiritual leadership. The religious leadership was poor, and the political leadership was just absolutely evil and dysfunctional. And so he saw the famine that they were in. And throughout Israel, there's from the beginning, there's a connection. They would call the king the shepherd. So there's no missing that. To see sheep without a shepherd is to see people without a king, or with a poor king. And so Jesus steps in, and he teaches them and feeds them. So he comes in as the king, as the Messiah, and then he teaches them, he gives them spiritual nourishment, and he feeds them. He gives them physical nourishment. He provides for them as promised, as we can trust. And it's funny because, he's calling us to leadership, because if there's not good leadership, then there's spiritual famine. That's just the way it is. And then it's funny because Egypt in Joseph's day, we go back to the Joseph and Jacob story, Egypt was in abundance. It supplies the perfect contrast. Egypt was absolutely in abundance. There was a famine, and they had plenty. And why? Because good leadership. Pharaoh. You got to give the guy credit. Joseph interpreted his dream, and he said look at this. This is Genesis 41:38. So Pharaoh asked his officials, this is right after Joseph interpreted his dream. Pharaoh says to his wise men, to his officials, he's motioning at Joseph, and he says, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? And then he put him in charge of the whole thing. He's my second man in charge now. He's over everything. That is good leadership. That is body life, is what that is. To recognize the Spirit in someone, and then to encourage and empower them and say, go, do what God has called you to do. Live out the vision that God has given you, the dream that God has given you. I'll support you in this. That's body life right there. That's good leadership. And that's when there's an abundance, right? That's what we're to do as good leaders, is to notice the Spirit in someone else. Yesterday we were moving Monarch. So the whole Monarch community got together, probably 40, 50 people, and we were moving from St. John over to Church on the Drive, so from Mills to Edgewater, across from Publix right there. And I know most of the people, but there were other people there. And so there's this one woman there, and she was just dynamite. This gal, I mean, she's an older lady. She had some gray hairs, and she had her dolly, and she was just winging stuff. I even told her once, I was like, I don't think that dolly's going to be able to move that, and she just moves right up, and she tears off, like. And I had to tell her later, I'm like, look, you're incredible. You're doing a great job here, you know, and it's just an example of that's the way we should be. We should always be recognizing, look at this person, look what they can do. And then encouraging that gift, encouraging this spirit, the spirit that was in this woman. I think and it turns out, I think she's one of your walking friends on Saturday, Marguerite. So people were just jumping in. Publix even came over and brought us Gatorades and bananas and stuff and said, welcome to the neighborhood. You know, that's a good community right there, huh? That's what we want to do. That's how we want to live. That's how we become good leaders, is to empower, not to have the power, but to see whatever the Spirit's doing and saying, go, look at you, wow. And that's one of the reasons Egypt enjoyed such abundance, is because Pharaoh recognized the Spirit of God and empowered the person in whom it was working. And then spiritual leaders trust in God's plan. And God's plan never looks the way we expect it, doesn't it? Susie's letter, we could read that to ourselves every day, couldn't we? Because it was really about it's not going to go how you expect it. So just know that right off the top. You know, we must let go of thinking that God is going to work in ways that we expect. The glory is His. It's not ours. He's going to do stuff to bring Himself glory, not us saying, yeah, that's what I knew would happen. I told you. That's not the glory God's working for. He works for when we just say, I don't know, but God did it, and glory to Him. Like, how has this church gone on for 35 years? I don't know, but God's did it, and is doing it, and glory to Him. That's all. It's not something we put together. We just were part of the Spirit and moved with the Spirit. And, we keep thinking God, we as humans, and we can't help it, we keep thinking God is going to do things in human ways and means, and He just doesn't. All these stories, He doesn't work that way. You know, Jesus when the disciples, the closer He got to the cross, the more He said, the last are first and the first are last. He kept saying that to the disciples. He kept saying what was going to happen, but they didn't believe Him. But He just was saying, this is the way the kingdom works. It's a flip of the world, The stone that has been rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the work of the Lord, and it is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. That's Psalm 118. That is our life. It's always it's not the way we thought it would be, or the world thought it would be, or the builders thought it would be. It's marvelous in our eyes. And that's the life we want to live as spiritual leaders. So regarding Jacob on that night, as far as trusting in God's plan, look at this. This is Genesis 46, 2-3. And God spoke to Israel in a vision at night and said, Jacob, Jacob, using his human name there. "Here I am," Jacob replied. God says, "I am God." Hello, I'm God. We haven't spoken in a while. Remember me? I am God. I mean, he has to introduce himself. Goodness gracious. Talk about a spiritual famine. I am God, the God of your father. Remember that? Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. Told him exactly what he needed to think, because Jacob, what was passed down to him was that this land of Canaan, where they were, this is the promised land, and eventually God's going to give it to you. And he's going to give you this land. He's going to give you a nation to live in it, and there's going to be a worldwide blessing that comes through this. That were the promises. It said nothing of Egypt. There was nothing of Egypt in that story. So here God shows up and says, so Jacob had to be worried, but this is where I'm supposed to be. This is the promised land. I don't understand what you're doing, God. Does that ever happen to us? And he says, do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. And so God says, you're just going to have to trust my plan. I know it doesn't make sense to you. I know Egypt is a foreign nation, and you think, why in the world would Egypt be part of the plan? But just trust me. And then regarding Jacob's family, we spared Glenn from having to read all the names. But when you read through that genealogy, which is essentially what it is, it's just like Jesus' genealogy in Matthew, because it's not this dry list of names. It brings out these stories that are in there, and it brings out these foreigners, and it brings out these sinners and these scandals, and you can see all these stories, just like Jesus' genealogy, that has sinners and redeemed people from other places, from difficult times, from big mistakes, and they're redeemed and then listed in Jesus' own genealogy. And you see it here. You've got Tamar, who dressed up like a prostitute to trick her father-in-law. Here she is. She's in the list, and her kids. It says specifically, it says a couple of wives, and this wife is a Canaanite. She's a Canaanite. She's not supposed to be part of the Israelites. They weren't supposed to mix with the other nations, but here she is, and she's been redeemed, and she's part of the group. It's all over. And then there's Joseph. Joseph's wife is the daughter of an Egyptian priest who worships the sun god Ra of Egypt. And she's included. She's part of it. And her two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are part of this. So you just see God's grace and see God's plan, that he's going to bring his plan and love for all of humanity to redeem us and bring us in to his family. It's not like we think it's going to happen. He just does it. And then regarding the disciples, they come back from their successful trip on their own, and they're very popular, and Jesus says, let's go somewhere in seclusion and rest. Let's get away. That's not the way the human plan would strike while the iron's hot and make hay in the sunshine. Here we're doing things, and Jesus says, let's go away and rest a bit. Isn't that just like Jesus, his plan to say, no, this is what I want for right now? It's always different than our expectations, and so we have to trust in God's plan. And then the third thing is to trust in God's presence. And here's God again speaking to Jacob there in Beersheba. He says, this is verse 4, I will go down to Egypt with you. I will go down to Egypt with you. How about that promise? Not go down to Egypt. I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. That was his worry too. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. So this whole idea that you're not alone. Trust in God's presence with you. He has given us His Holy Spirit, His holy presence to be with us. We can trust in that as we go. And we've got some people that are physically moving. We've got the Campbells and the Perrys. They're ready to they're taking a leap, and I'm sure you need these promises as well, that God's going to go with you, and He's got a plan, and He's got provision for you. And you are to be spiritual leaders in the places that you go. And that's our call. That's all of our call. Because we don't, we might not go anywhere physically, but you're going to leave this building and go into some places. You're going to go out the door. You're going to go next door. You're going to go out of your bedroom. We're always going, and we need to be spiritual leaders wherever we go. And this is a beautiful thing about Mark's gospel. A lot of people think Mark's gospel is shorter than the other synoptics. There's Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar. John's totally different. And so they kind of think, well, Mark is just the shorter version of all the stories because it's 16 chapters. And sometimes Mark's stories are shorter. But Mark's gospel is unique. In the stories that Mark chooses to put in his gospel, he adds details that are unique to his gospel. And so there's some really good stuff here in the feeding of the 5,000, in mentioning that Jesus saw them and said that they are and had compassion because they were sheep without a shepherd. And then look at this thing this exquisite detail that Mark decides to add into his gospel. This is verse 39. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. Okay? Shepherd, green grass. Where is it taking you? Isn't that wonderful? Psalm 23, right? Yeah. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me by still waters. He restores my soul. And so here we have Jesus stepping in to Psalm 23 and saying, I am your shepherd. Lie down in this grass. And Mark says that he had them sit down. And it's really a weak translation because it's not the word sit down. It's the word lie down. He had them go over the green grass and he had them lie down on it, recline on it. He broke them up into groups of 50s and 100s, which goes a long way for saying yay to small churches, right? 50s and 100s, okay? Why did he break them up, all these 5,000, into 50s and 100s? Why? Because so probably he could get to them. So the disciples so Jesus could walk through and visit. So he could be with them. They weren't just this big mess. But break up into small groups so that my presence can come among you. Relax. Let me restore your soul, as he taught them, nourished their souls, and then fed them as well. And notice how there's 12 baskets left over. There's 12 disciples. Each doubting one had a full basket to themselves afterwards, just to remember now what God can do. And it's a beautiful foreshadow as he breaks, as he gives thanks and breaks. It's a foreshadow of the Last Supper, of Emmaus, of the heavenly banquet, of any time that we come together in his presence, isn't it? I love how beautiful it is because it's not extravagant. It's lay down on the green grass. Here's some bread. Here's some fish. It's simple. It's simple and beautiful and organized. It's not about physical extravagance We just had this story of King Herod having his big party and all this stuff. Here's Jesus, the true leader, the spiritual leader, the Messiah of Israel. Instead, takes him to the green grass and says, lie down. Let's take this simple offering. The disciples were saying, he said, you feed him. And they said, that's going to break us. That's immediately what they, they went right there. Financially, you're going to break us. And he said, no, just what have you got? What has God given you? Simple, organized, not extravagant, but more than enough. And so that's what we need to do. We need to trust in God's provision. We need to trust in His plan. It's going to be different than what we think. And we've got to trust in His presence, because that's what His presence comes among us and nourishes us and says, lie down on the green grass and let me restore your soul. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for 35 years of this church. Thank you for each and every person here and your provision for them and your plan for them, your purpose for them, your presence upon them. We pray that you would fill each of us with your Spirit today. Remind us that you are God and you are with us. And let us go. Empower us to be spiritual leaders wherever your plan takes us. Lord, give us that strength. Give us your Spirit to say the right words, to do the right things, and to grow up, to go from being little boys and girls to being grown leaders for you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now take a couple minutes and bask in His presence. Lie down on the green grass. And you're going to have an opportunity to share on one of these squares by writing or drawing something out in the lobby.